Of all the follies of the present Biden administration, none is more emphatic than their genuflection to the craze over global warming and their return to the farce of the Paris Climate Accord and the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which are seeking the destruction of the energy economies of the world. The often stated and illusionary goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050 is, if understood properly, nothing less than a suicide note for the prosperity and independence of every first world economy and a heartless condemnation of third world economies to be abandoned in the state of poverty and zero progress. You all know reality. And one reality that is as old as time is the following: you do not abandon what works and what you know works for a leap into the dark of that which we know does not work, cannot work, and which would displace the proven and reliable. That is what, among other things, this global warming fantasy amounts to. We have sources of energy, we have hydro, we have oil and gas, we have coal, and coal, in addition to being the fuel that brought the Industrial Revolution and all the attendant progress of the modern era into being, is also today not the coal of yesterday. Mining has vastly improved, its emissions vastly reduced, the control of every negative has vastly increased. The energy revolution of the past century has brought our nation into the #1 economic engine of the entire planet. And that is why the Biden administration's rejoining the world's energy enemies, going back against Mr. Trump's enlightened policies of support of all of America's sources of energy, backing America's stable, reliable energy resources is such a fatal move. Let Kentucky and the United States as a whole be the source of its own power and energy. Let us continue with the shale gas exploration and development. Let us shun fanatic environmentalism and globalist crusades and stay, as we always have, our own country with our own energy and what is proven, reliable, and entirely in our own hands. It was a privilege of a lifetime to serve as a member of President Trump's national security team, first as a U.S. ambassador to Canada and then as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. It was the greatest honor of my lifetime to represent the U.S. before the 193 member states, to champion our interests, our values, and our ideals in a body where many do not share our commitment to freedom and democracy. Today, I'd like to have a discussion with you about our challenges facing our country and our state, and why we need trade policies, energy policies, and climate policies that put America and the great state of Kentucky first. One of the great consolations of leaving government service is that it brought me home to Kentucky. Coming home has allowed me to see the impact the Trump administration's policies have had on the lives of Kentuckians. For example, the recent announcement that the Ford Motor Company plans to invest $5.8 billion right here in Kentucky. They're going to build a new plant to produce parts for electric vehicles, creating more than 5,000 new jobs for Kentucky workers. We received more good news recently when Toyota announced that it plans to build a new $461 million expansion of its Georgetown manufacturing plant to increase its capacity to manufacture electric vehicles. This is awesome news for Kentucky. But those investments, they didn't just magically appear. Ford and Toyota are making new investments in Kentucky because President Trump took on China's predatory trade practices and negotiated a new trade agreement with Mexico and Canada that brings good-paying manufacturing jobs home to America. He got rid of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which had exported millions of American jobs overseas, and he replaced it with the new trade deal, USMCA, that put Americans first. As U.S. Ambassador to Canada, I spent months at the negotiating table alongside President Trump, and also, I might add, alongside Prime Minister Trudeau, hammering out the details of that new trade agreement. The deal we produced is great for Kentucky. Canada is our largest export market. In 2019, Kentucky exported $7.8 billion to Canada, a quarter of our state's total exports to the world. The USMCA is helping Kentucky build on that and increase our exports even more, and it's also bringing jobs back home to the state of Kentucky. The fact is, without USMCA and the Trump administration's strong actions to push back against China's unfair trade practices, these new investments and thousands of good-paying jobs that go with them would likely have gone to Mexico, China, or other low-wage countries. I'm going to be watching very closely on Thursday as President Biden meets alongside, for the first trilateral meeting since Biden, on USMCA with Obrador and with Trudeau, and we'll be going on Fox Business on Thursday after the meeting and also on Canadian broadcasting at 5 o'clock that afternoon. This requires not just better trade agreements, but it also requires electricity supplies that are plentiful, reliable, and affordable. Growing soybeans, corn and tobacco, raising cattle, horses and poultry, producing bourbon, producing cars, trucks, planes, aircraft parts, steel, iron, aluminum, and plastic, and all other the great things in Kentucky sells to the world. This requires affordable, reliable electricity. Indeed, Kentucky's entire economy is driven by affordable, reliable electricity. And what keeps Kentucky's electricity rates affordable is coal. 69% of our power generation mix is fueled by coal. Natural gas contributes another 23%. Wind and solar contribute in the low single digits. Kentucky needs to protect its coal fleet to maintain and attract more jobs that are dependent on low-cost power to compete in a global economy. Today, however, our country and our state are facing a self-inflicted energy crisis. In 2008, the United States was the world's largest oil importer, but President Trump changed that. He withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. He approved the Keystone XL pipeline. He opened the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to exploration, and he rolled back Obama-era regulations. He turned America into an energy superpower. On President Trump's watch, the United States passed Russia and Saudi Arabia as the world's largest oil producer, and we became the largest exporter of natural gas. That accomplishment strengthened Americans' national security, making us less dependent on foreign oil producers. And it created jobs here in America. It created jobs here at home in Kentucky. Unfortunately, that is not what we have today. Why are our energy prices skyrocketing? It's very simple. During the 2020 campaign, candidate Joe Biden declared, "We're going to end fossil fuel." Well, when you promise to end fossil fuel, oil producers don't drill more oil wells. When you make clear you plan to destroy an industry, banks and investment firms stop investing in it. The New York Times reports that the flow of fossil fuel investments has, in quote, slowed to a trickle. The result? Less fossil fuel production and higher prices. Here's the worst part. President Biden has declared his intention to reduce fossil fuel production at home, all in the name of climate change. But then when gasoline prices began to skyrocket, he picked up the phone and called OPEC, a foreign oil cartel, to produce more oil abroad. And by the way, they turned him down. How does that make sense? Increased production will result in the same carbon emissions no matter where the oil is drilled. So why not produce oil in the United States instead of Saudi Arabia? It's not just fossil fuels in general that the Biden administration is targeting. They have very specifically declared a war on coal. Biden climate czar John Kerry just declared last week that the U.S. will eliminate coal by 2030. And Biden's nominee for a top Treasury Department position recently went further, declaring that she wants coal and other fossil fuel producers to go bankrupt so we can tackle climate change. This is a woman who attended Moscow State University on, I'm kidding you not, a Lenin Scholarship in the old Soviet Union. This is a woman who praised the Soviet Union's economic system and advocates central political control of capital. You know, I appreciate that the graduates of Moscow State bankrupted the Soviet Union out of existence. But here in America, no public official has the right to intentionally try to bankrupt a lawful industry, especially on which so many Americans and Kentuckians depend on for affordable energy. So why is the Biden administration trying to bankrupt fossil fuels out of existence? Because just as the president declared at the COP26 climate meeting in Glasgow, Scotland, they believe climate change is an essential threat to human existence as we know it. No, it's not. Climate change is real, it is a problem, but it is a manageable problem. Bjorn Lomborg, a personal friend and the president of the Copenhagen Consensus, recently explained to us bad thinking that shaped this conference. The delegates, he said, falsely portrayed today's world as bad and getting worse, failed to consider the cost of reducing carbon emissions, failed to discuss the benefits humans receive from fossil fuels. They failed to discuss any positive attributes of CO2 emissions, and utterly failed to appreciate humanity's ability to adapt to climate change. But let's look at the positives of the current situation. We're here today to celebrate the 75th annual meeting. I want you to think back on what America was like 75 years ago. In 1946, most American homes did not have air conditioning. The vast majority used wood or coal as their primary heating fuel. And most rural Kentuckians had no electricity at all. Farmers in this state milked their cows under the glowing glow of kerosene lanterns. Just think of all the advances in technology that have changed our lives in the last 75 years, from air conditioning to the internet. And then imagine the leaps in the technology we will see in the next 75 years that will make our lives safer and better. What will make these technologies advances possible? Growth, free enterprise, development, prosperity. Prosperous societies have better infrastructure. Prosperous societies can protect their citizens against cold and heat and rising sea levels. The people in this room know firsthand the devastation by hurricanes, just as recent as Hurricane Ida, where you sent more than 160 personnel to Louisiana, and that is just one example of the rescue missions that you have sent to save the lives of people, especially those in nursing homes and other areas where heat, electricity, cool was absolutely vital to their survival. Prosperous societies can adapt to a changing climate, but prosperous societies also require affordable, reliable energy. If we follow the advice of the climate alarmists, we will reduce prosperity, hamper innovation, and lessen our ability to respond and adapt to climate change. And guess who's going to be the worst affected? The poorest people in the poorest countries of the world. And just on the cover of the magazine you received, I was in South Sudan. I can't imagine that they would not have fossil fuels. They are so poor and so needy, and the starvation is at a level 3. Their starvation in Yemen is at a level 4. The top level is level 5, where there is death. Level 4 is wasting, which is what we have in Yemen. Over 1 billion people starving to death. Can you imagine if we don't have fossil fuels, what would happen to more migration and less agriculture being produced for these starving people? Did you know that California uses more electricity on its pools and hot tubs than all of the 44 million inhabitants of Uganda? That's just hard to believe. Third world countries need fossil fuels to develop into first world countries. But today, the Biden administration wants to shut the energy door on developing nations. After using fossil fuels to develop our economies, they want to deny these countries that same opportunity. They will consign tens of millions, 1 billion, to unnecessary poverty and deprivation. Instead of allowing these countries access to cheap energy they need to develop, the delegates in Glasgow want the U.S. and other developed countries to pay them not to use fossil fuels. Matter of fact, that's going to be to the tune of $100 billion. President Biden needs to hear this loud and clear. We should not be sending Kentucky tax dollars to developing countries to pay them not to buy Kentucky coal. And I will tell you, my experience when I would go back and forth to the Oval Office and meet with President Trump during my time at the UN, we would be sitting at his desk in the Oval Office, and he would lean over to me and he would say, "Are you watching the American taxpayer dollars? Are you making certain that the Secretary General and all of the other countries understand we are the largest donor, but these are Americans that are tax-paying, working citizens that are paying for this?" So I had a special interest in making certain that not only American taxpayers, but obviously my home of Kentucky, that Kentucky tax-paying dollars were being held accountable, transparent, and most certainly not going to waste. Today in America, almost 2/3 of electricity is still generated by fossil fuels. Despite spending billions of dollars in the U.S. taxpayer subsidies over the last 3 decades, the U.S. wind turbines still generate only 8% of our country's electricity, while solar generates only 2%. I'm all about adding wind and solar into the energy mix, but we can never fully rely on them, and here's why. Wind and solar require wind and sun. So if you don't have wind and sun, you don't have power. Can you imagine a doctor at the U of L or the University of Kentucky Hospital doing open heart surgery, but he can't perform this surgery in the operating room if there's no wind blowing or any sun shining? He needs or she needs reliable sources of electricity. As one of your board members, Tony Campbell, recently wrote President Biden, renewable resources, particularly solar and wind, do not provide the same 24/7 assurance of reliable power, a fact that is especially pertinent during emergencies and extreme weather events. Tony's right. Your motto is resilience, reliable, responsive. Well, until adequate battery storage technology has been invented so we can overcome the intermittence of solar and wind, we simply cannot be resilient, reliable, responsive without fossil fuels. The way to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels is not to force people to stop using them before alternate energy sources are ready. The solution is not subtraction, but addition. We need the all-of-above energy policy. We need oil and gas. We need wind and solar. We need more, not less, nuclear power. And we need coal. We need coal to provide low-cost energy to industry and manufacturers that compete in a global economy. We need to find ways to address the challenge of climate change, but we need to do it without destroying jobs, important jobs for Kentucky workers. And that means we need rational climate policies with a reasonable timeline for a transition into a different energy future. The climate alarmists in Glasgow and the Biden White House are overly focused on the environmental element of the trending environmental, social, and governments, or ESG movement. Just one more acronym about a 500 I had to learn at the United Nations. And all of us, we all care about the environment, but my experience at the UN, the ESG movement is being weaponized by the Communist Chinese Party to threaten the security of the free world. Let me just tell you, China has a clear strategy, and we have just seen that in their last-minute, watered-down remarks at COP26, commitment to phase down instead of, as they promised, phase out coal power. Beijing wants to dominate the global marketplace by using their predatory trade practices and low-cost fossil fuel, which China relies upon for 85% of its energy, while encouraging others to run on inferior, unreliable solar and wind power. And the Biden administration policies would help them achieve those goals. To meet the president's electricity goals, the U.S. would need at least 600 times more wind and solar power over the next 8 to 14 years than we have today, an estimated cost of $1.7 trillion. I can only imagine the number of workers it will require for electricity co-ops to go and repair lines because this wind is 600 times more powerful. That's unrealistic, it's unwise, and it's certainly unaffordable. And I can say, I know firsthand, this is a major threat to national security. I support a gradual transition of the electricity grid, but there's ways to get there through energy innovation, not energy deprivation. We should emphasize the social element of the ESG movement and remember that the ultimate goal of energy policy is to serve the citizens, their interest. This should not be just a box to tick off. This should not be window dressing. This should not be just the work of activists to say, well, I'm all about the ESGs, when most people don't even know what the ESGs are. And that's what they do. They don't want you to know because then you would ask questions. That is what each of you has demonstrated over the last 75 years, that we hold people like this accountable. The social element, improving the lives of the citizens that each of you serve. That is the America and the Kentucky that you and I know. That's the America and Kentucky that I grew up with in Glasgow, Kentucky, Barron County. That is the America that you and I love. And I can promise you that that is the America and Kentucky that we will fight for together. God bless you, and God bless this wonderful state of Kentucky and the United States of America.